You've probably noticed how certain people enter a room and immediately command attention without saying a word. There's something unsettling about their presence, something that makes others shift uncomfortably, lean forward, and wait. They understand what most people never learn, that in a world obsessed with noise, silence becomes the ultimate power move. Today, we're diving into Machiavelli's most devastating psychological weapon and why the person who speaks least often controls the most. If you want to master the art of psychological dominance and learn how silence can make you untouchable, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon for more content on power dynamics and mental manipulation. The uncomfortable truth is that most people are terrified of silence. They fill every gap with nervous laughter, unnecessary words, explanations nobody asked for. They mistake volume for authority and confuse talking with leading. But while they're busy broadcasting their insecurities through endless chatter, the truly powerful are watching, calculating, and letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Every word you don't say becomes a question mark in someone else's mind. Every pause you hold becomes space for them to project their fears, their assumptions, their desperate need to fill the void. When you master silence, you're not just controlling the conversation, you're controlling their thoughts. People will lean into your quiet intensity, trying to read what you're thinking, what you know, what you might do next. This psychological tension is your greatest asset because uncertainty breeds respect, and respect breeds power. The moment you start explaining yourself, justifying your position, or filling awkward pauses, you've already lost. You've shown them that their comfort matters more than your authority. You've revealed that you need their validation to feel secure. But when you sit in silence, when you let the uncomfortable quiet stretch until they break first, you've established who really controls the room. Silence forces others to show their cards while keeping yours hidden. It makes them work harder for your attention, your approval, your response. They start second-guessing themselves, wondering if they've said too much, revealed too much, exposed themselves to someone who clearly sees more than they're letting on. This is why the most powerful leaders throughout history understood that words are cheap, but silence is priceless. It creates mystery where others create noise. It builds anticipation where others waste attention. Most importantly, it forces people to come to you instead of chasing after them. When someone is desperately trying to fill the silence you've created, they're essentially performing for you, seeking your approval, trying to earn a reaction. You've flipped the power dynamic without saying a single word. They're now the ones who need something from you. They're the ones feeling uncertain. They're the ones wondering where they stand. This psychological reversal is the foundation of true influence, because influence isn't about convincing people with arguments. It's about making them convince themselves while you watch. Every time they speak into your silence, they're telling you exactly how to control them. They're revealing their insecurities, their motivations, their pressure points. You learn what makes them nervous, what they're trying to prove, what they need from you. Meanwhile, you remain a mystery. They know nothing about your true thoughts, your real intentions, your next move. This information asymmetry becomes your competitive advantage in every interaction, every negotiation, every power play that matters. People project strength onto quiet confidence and weakness onto nervous chatter. When you speak less, they assume you know more. When you pause before responding, they think you're carefully considering profound thoughts. When you don't immediately react to their provocations, they start wondering if you've seen through their game entirely. The beauty of this dynamic is that it's completely effortless once you understand the psychology behind it. You're not working harder to gain power, you're working smarter. While others exhaust themselves trying to impress, convince, and explain, you're conserving your energy and letting their need for validation do all the work for you. This is the essence of Machiavellian power. It's not about force or manipulation. It's about understanding human psychology so deeply that people manipulate themselves. They create their own prisons of uncertainty and hand you the keys without even realizing it. But here's where most people misunderstand the power of silence. It's not about being mysterious for the sake of being mysterious. It's not about playing games or withholding information just to be difficult. True strategic silence is purposeful, calculated, and deployed with surgical precision. You speak when your words will have maximum impact. You stay quiet when silence will create more pressure than any argument could. You let others fill the void with their own assumptions, fears, and projections, while you remain the calm center of their emotional storm. This requires discipline, because every instinct you've been taught tells you to respond, to explain, to defend, to engage. Society has conditioned you to believe that silence means you don't have anything valuable to say, that quick responses show intelligence, that filling conversational gaps is polite and necessary. But these social programming work against your interests when you're trying to build real power. The person who responds to every comment, who explains every decision, who fills every pause, has already positioned themselves as subordinate to those they're desperately trying to please. Think about the most intimidating people you've ever met. I guarantee they weren't the loudest ones in the room. They were the ones who said little, but somehow their presence dominated everything. When they finally did speak, people listened not because their words were necessarily brilliant, but because their silence had created anticipation, respect, and a little bit of fear. Fear not of violence or aggression, but of being judged and found wanting by someone who clearly sees everything but reveals nothing. This is psychological dominance in its purest form. You're not forcing anyone to submit to you. You're creating conditions where submission feels like the natural response. They start seeking your approval because your silence has made that approval seem valuable and rare. They begin measuring their words more carefully around you because they're never sure how you're interpreting what they say. They become more invested in the interaction because they're working harder to get a response from you. Every time they break the silence first, they're essentially admitting that your comfort with quiet makes them uncomfortable with themselves. They're confessing that they need external validation more than you do. They're revealing that they're more afraid of being ignored than you are of being misunderstood. This admission of psychological weakness becomes the foundation of your power over them. From that moment forward, they know and you know that you're operating from a position of strength while they're operating from need. The most dangerous part of mastering silence is that it becomes addictive. Once you experience the rush of watching someone squirm in the quiet you've created, once you feel the shift in power dynamics when they start over-explaining themselves to fill the void, once you realize how much information people give away when they're uncomfortable with silence, you'll never want to go back to being the person who talks too much. You'll start recognizing verbal diarrhea for what it really is, a desperate attempt to control a situation through sheer volume of words rather than strategic positioning. You'll see how weak it makes people look when they can't sit comfortably in uncertainty. You'll understand why the truly powerful have always been economical with their words and generous with their silence. But remember, this power comes with responsibility. When you can make people uncomfortable with a glance, when your silence creates more pressure than most people's threats, when your mere presence shifts the energy in a room, you're wielding psychological weapons that can destroy relationships, careers, and lives. The goal isn't to hurt people for sport. The goal is to understand how power really works, so you can protect yourself from those who would use these techniques against you, and deploy them strategically when your goals require it. True power isn't about dominating every interaction. It's about having the ability to dominate when necessary and choosing not to when it serves no purpose. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is break your own silence. Show vulnerability, engage in genuine conversation, But that choice should be yours, made from a position of strength, not a compulsive need to fill empty air with nervous words. The person who masters silence has options. The person who can't handle quiet has already limited themselves to being reactive, defensive, and ultimately controllable by anyone patient enough to wait them out. So the next time you're in a meeting, a negotiation, a social situation where you feel the urge to speak, to explain, to fill the silence, stop. Count to 5. Let the quiet stretch until someone else breaks first. Watch how quickly the power dynamic shifts in your favor. Notice how much information they give you when they're uncomfortable with the space you've created. Observe how your perceived value increases when your words become rare rather than constant. This is how you train yourself to become dangerous, not through aggression or manipulation, but through understanding psychology so deeply that you never have to chase power, because power comes to you. In a world full of noise, silence isn't just golden, it's devastating. And now you know how to wield it. The most sophisticated practitioners of this art understand that silence has different flavors, each serving a specific psychological purpose. There's the silence of judgment, where your quiet evaluation makes others feel exposed and vulnerable. There's the silence of superiority, where your lack of response suggests their words aren't worthy of acknowledgement. There's the silence of threat, where your stillness implies consequences they can't predict. And there's the silence of indifference, perhaps the most devastating of all, where your lack of reaction communicates that they simply don't matter enough to warrant your attention. Each type creates a different emotional response, and mastering when to deploy which variation turns you into a psychological chess master, playing against opponents who don't even realize the game has begun. When you walk into a boardroom and the chatter dies down, when your presence alone shifts the energy without a word spoken, when people start second-guessing their own statements because of how calmly you're observing them, you've transcended basic power dynamics and entered the realm of psychological warfare. This isn't about being rude or antisocial. It's about understanding that in every human interaction, someone is setting the tempo, someone is controlling the emotional temperature, and someone is determining who feels comfortable and who feels pressured. By default, that someone should be you. The weak mistake silence for absence, but the intelligent recognize it as the ultimate form of presence. When everyone else is scrambling to be heard, to be noticed, to be validated, your refusal to participate in that desperate competition immediately elevates you above it. Think about how this plays out in negotiations. While your opponent is explaining, justifying, revealing their bottom line through nervous over-talking, you're gathering intelligence. Every extra word they speak beyond what's necessary tells you something about their position, their desperation, their willingness to compromise. Meanwhile, your strategic pauses and measured responses keep them guessing about your true intentions. They can't read you because you've given them nothing to read, while they've given you a detailed map of their psychological landscape. This information asymmetry becomes your decisive advantage. You know what they're thinking, what they fear, what they need, while they're operating blind, making assumptions about someone who remains deliberately unknowable. In these moments, silence isn't just a tactic. It's a weapon that cuts deeper than any argument could. The mastery of this skill extends far beyond professional settings. In personal relationships, romantic dynamics, family interactions, social hierarchies, the person who controls the silence controls the emotional temperature of every encounter. When someone is trying to manipulate you through emotional outbursts, guilt trips, or aggressive confrontations, your calm silence becomes their kryptonite. It forces them to escalate until they reveal exactly how desperate they are for your reaction, how much power they've given you over their emotional state. They exhaust themselves trying to break through your composure while you remain centered, collecting information about what really triggers them. Every word they speak in anger or frustration becomes ammunition you can use later. Every emotional confession becomes leverage you didn't have to ask for. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of mastering silence is how it changes your relationship with yourself. When you're no longer compulsively filling every quiet moment with unnecessary words, when you're not constantly seeking validation through verbal interaction, when you can sit comfortably in your own presence without needing external stimulation, you develop an inner strength that others can sense immediately. This isn't just confidence, it's psychological independence. You no longer need others to make you feel important because you've learned to find value in your own thoughts, your own observations, your own internal world. This self-sufficiency becomes magnetic because most people are desperately dependent on external validation, and they're drawn to someone who seems to have transcended that need. The ripple effects are profound. People start seeking your opinion precisely because you don't offer it freely. They begin competing for your attention because you don't give it away cheaply. They start respecting your boundaries because you've demonstrated that your time and energy are valuable resources, not unlimited gifts for anyone who demands them. Your silence creates scarcity, and scarcity drives up value in every area of human interaction. When you finally do speak, your words carry weight because they've learned that you don't waste them on trivial matters. When you choose to engage, people pay attention because they know you've calculated that this moment deserves your mental energy. This psychological positioning transforms every relationship in your life. Colleagues stop taking you for granted because they're never quite sure what you're thinking about their performance. Friends start being more thoughtful about how they treat you because your quiet observation makes them aware of their own behavior. Family members begin respecting your boundaries because you've demonstrated that you won't be drawn into every drama that doesn't serve your interests. Romantic partners become more invested because they're working harder to understand someone who doesn't reveal everything immediately. In each case, your strategic use of silence has created a power dynamic that works in your favor without you having to demand or fight for respect. The ultimate realization is that most people's problems stem from talking too much, revealing too much, reacting too quickly, and engaging with situations that don't deserve their energy. They exhaust themselves explaining their position to people who were never going to understand anyway. They drain their power by participating in arguments they can't win. They diminish their value by making themselves too available, too predictable, too eager to please. But when you understand that silence is not emptiness but fullness, not absence but concentrated presence, not weakness but the ultimate strength, you gain access to a level of influence that most people never even realize exists. So, here's your final assignment. For the next week, practice holding silence for 10 seconds longer than feels comfortable in every significant conversation. Watch how people respond when you don't immediately fill the space with words. Notice how much additional information they give you when they're uncomfortable with the quiet. Observe how your perceived value changes when your responses become more deliberate and less automatic. Pay attention to how differently people treat you when they can't predict your reactions. This simple exercise will teach you more about power dynamics than any book, course, or seminar ever could. Because true power isn't learned through theory, it's developed through practice, and silence is the safest way to practice psychological dominance without risking the relationships or opportunities that matter to you. The person who masters this skill becomes untouchable, not because they're avoiding engagement, but because they've learned to engage on their own terms from a position of strength, with full awareness of exactly how much power they wield in every human interaction.